Hello, my name is Leah Fiore Tracy, and welcome to Take Me to Eternity. Howdy, y'all. Today I have a guest with me, one that many of you already know, a wonderful brother in Christ, Dave Jenkins. For those of you who don't know Dave, he is an author, an editor, a husband, a speaker, and he just published a new book called Contentment, The Journey of a Lifetime. Today I have the pleasure of talking to him about his new book. Welcome, Dave. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Leah. How are you doing?
I am good. I'm really glad that we get to talk about your new book. It was very much needed for me. You know, it's always nice to have the reminder of how to be content in the Lord. Would you tell us a little bit about your life, your marriage, your ministry, and what you are currently working on?
Well, I love that you shared a little bit about, how it helped you because there was nobody that needed this book more than me. And I know we're going to talk about that today. So, but to the question that you asked, yeah, well, I'm a sinner saved by the grace of God. I've been a Christian since I was 5 and a very imperfect follower of Christ and entered into public ministry at the age of 19. Some would say 18 or 17. I started writing and doing that, and for high school students, that my fellow high school students, and then that morphed into a ministry called Servants of Grace, and that sort of just took off, and now we have over 300 plus writers. I don't even know how many podcasts anymore. I lost track, and a magazine, a publishing company, and and a partridge in a pear tree. I forgot that one too. So, all joking aside, I am also, as you mentioned, an author now of 3 books. I'm working on my 4th. It's been a slow process, probably. I think I started that one back in 2021, and there's always so many things going on with me, and never enough time, and so it's a miracle that I'm able to get any books published, really. Um, but here we are with this one, and so I'm working on that, and then just the usual craziness, just recording a lot, doing these interviews, talking about things that are going on in the church and our culture, and just trying every day to be as faithful as I can, and love my wife. Um, take care of myself. I've been on actually something maybe of interest to people. I've in the last since August of last year, I'm down 50 pounds, and I've just been watching pretty much every single thing that I've been eating. And so I don't have a secret. There's no magic formula for anybody. I get asked, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's called watching everything that you eat. That's
Yep.
the key. So that means I'm not going to eat fast food, although I've started going back to fast food. Not eating fast food, not eating pizza, all the good stuff. Ice cream, although I'm slipping, but I'm also walking. So I try to walk between about 5,000 steps every day, sometimes more, sometimes less. And so, just doing that and drinking lots of water, trying to get healthier. So I was like, some people wouldn't even believe this. I was like 265, so I'm like 215, 220 right now, which if you see me in person, you'd be like, there's no way that you're like 190, but
Well,
I promise you, I'm 220 pounds. Okay. When I get
that's a
over
huge
the,
accomplishment. I mean,
yeah.
that's a really big accomplishment. I'm down 20 myself in the past like 6 months probably. And for me, I'm like, okay, I can see the goal getting, it's getting smaller and smaller. I don't have to lose as much as I was originally looking at, which is so nice. But it's wonderful being able to feel healthier. And 50 pounds is a huge accomplishment. So
Yeah.
bravo on that one.
20 pounds is great. Keep it up,
Yep. Yeah, I had somebody tell me, they said, well, it took you a long time to put on the weight, so give your body a chance to let the weight go. Like, don't expect it to happen all at once. So if you're doing something and you're trying to see results, don't expect to like all of a sudden be 50 pounds down. you know, you have to do the work. You have to like do it in a way that's healthy for your body too. So, and that's awesome because I'm sure that helps with when you are more content. It is easier to do things like watching what you're eating and walking and, doing all of the things that are hard when you're not content. Because when you're not content, you end up depressed and anxious, and that just hinders doing anything good for yourself.
It's like Paul said, to Timothy, discipline yourself for the sake of godliness, right? I mean,
Yep.
that's why, he said that he beat his body. So Paul cared about physical fitness. He wasn't against caring, just about his spiritual health, but his physical body. He put it into subjection, he said. He disciplined himself in every way for the sake of godliness. And I've been told for years, you got to start taking care of yourself if you want to last. And it just kind of goes in one ear and out the other. And then at the end of the day, I'm like, I know I need to do something, but I'm so tired. So it's just a reminder that and actually resting. So some people think all I do is work. Um,
Well, it kind
it
of
might
seems that way.
it might
You're
be
pretty
true.
busy.
It might be true, but I do actually rest and I do actually sleep. Like even the last couple days before we recorded this, I didn't even get that much done, and I just kind of took a long nap in the morning for Monday and Tuesday um, of the week that we're recording this, and it was just good for me because today I'm much more alert, and that's been a learning process over the last couple of years for me, where I have to let go. And at the end of the day, I'm like, I took a walk actually, and I was like, Lord, thank you for just what I got done today, and I just had to remind myself because my very type A workaholic personality with the military work ethic can still kick my rear end, and I didn't get enough done today. I have a mile long list of things to do, and I didn't get it done. So, but you just have to let that go at the end of the day and thank the Lord that for what you did get done. And so, yeah, like I said, I'm still growing in this area, and it is a journey. So that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, sometimes what you have to do is rest in the Lord and rest your body and, not overwork yourself because doing is important. We should be working and content in the life that we have so that we are able to accomplish the things that need to happen, whether it be a job or working at home or whatever it is that you have to do. But rest is also important, and it's really easy to get so overwhelmed with the world and so overwhelmed with all the things that need to happen that you don't allow yourself to rest. And that's just, God knows that we need to rest, and we need to follow suit. He rested, and we ought to rest also, without being a sloth, of course.
Yeah. The last thing I want at the end of the day is to be, like I think Spurgeon was 55 when he died, which is still relatively young in our day, but he was like 50 or 55, and he just worked himself to death, quite literally. And he had so many things to accomplish and do, and he never, you know, towards the end of his life, it just kind of gave out, and I don't, I want to be spent in that way, for the gospel, but I also don't want my ever at the end, I don't want to be having to stop. I want to just keep going, and I really want to make sure that I finish my race well. However many years left I have, I am still only 43 years old, so Lord willing, I have another 30 years at this. But I'm just thinking, what are those 30 years going to look like? And how can I make sure that I'm going to finish the race? Because I do have heart attacks and strokes on my side of the family, and apparently I have a strong history of dementia and Alzheimer's, and so these things are even as a 43-year-old, even it started really in my sort of mid 30s thinking this way. How am I gonna finish this race well? And so I really just want to finish well and do as well as I can to produce every day as much as I can for the honor and glory of God. And you could say if you say that I don't rest well, that's a pretty powerful motivation for me. Um, I just want to go and I want to be poured out, but also there is a little bit of pulling back and making sure, yeah, okay, that's great, but I got to rest too, and that's the balance. I don't know of anybody that has it. I don't have a secret formula for you. If you're looking for 10 steps, I'm the wrong guy for you on that. Although I got a whole laundry list of things I could say about being productive. Um, to that end for you. So I've read all those books. Um, but yeah, so anyway, we could go on and on about that.
Well, you have written multiple books, and I actually have two of them right here. Let me grab this one without knocking it over. So, this is the book that we are talking about today, and I highly recommend people getting it. It's a great book, and it reminds us to be content and how to be content, and that it is just the journey of a lifetime. It is something that we will forever have to work on and grow in. And, you know, your circumstances are always changing. Therefore, you're always having to learn how to be content in the spot that you're in life. And you've written other books, The Word Explored and The Word Matters. One of them is back here, right there, right there. And it's on biblical literacy, and the other one's on biblical authority. But your new book's on contentment. Can you tell me about why you chose to write the newest book?
Yeah, it's a great question. Originally, this book was for a series for biblical counselors to that basically hand out these booklets to people, and as I started working on that, I started realizing that, and even finishing the book, I realized that could be more than that, and it could be just kind of like a little book to get to learn a bit about what contentment is. But then I realized that the book that was as it was when I completed it, and even Sarah edited the first version of this book, I realized I really wasn't happy with that, and so I xed that idea of just it was at that point the first version of this book was about almost 10,000 words. So this book now, I actually the hardest thing to do as an author is to add after you're done, after it's edited, to actually go back and figure out what am I going to add to this book. I know you want to talk about that a little bit more and a little bit later, um, but that's the really the hardest thing to do as an author. And so I actually added if any of your guys if you're a writer or an author, I added just about 14,000 words after already completing this project, which is no small thing. So I went through, I actually didn't change substantively what was already written. If anything, I enhanced it and then I added to it to give it a bit more substance because I felt like this book substantively, it could be good as a just a kind of like a primer and introduction, but I felt like it was too short. It, it wasn't too concise. I think you can always be even more concise, which I really try hard to do to say a lot in a little bit of space, right? But I think that what this book ended up being was something more. When I started working on it, it wasn't hard, substantively, content wise, to put it together. This book for me was really a application project. So putting the final like stamp on it and getting to the final like point of, hey, I'm done with this book and I'm happy with where it's at. That was much harder with this book because and looking back, I can see that this was, my other book on biblical. You mentioned the one on biblical literacy. That was a fairly easy book for me to write. Um, this book was also a sanctification project. This one though was more of like an application project for me. And it was a hard application lesson. I think some people are like, "Well, you're still learning." I'm like, "This is why the title, man. The title is a journey of a lifetime. It's a journey. Nobody has it figured out. Nobody had there's no like magic bullet. It's like here's the secret to the secret behind contentment. Anybody who says that, you should probably walk away because um, they're probably not a Christian.
So are
Like,
you saying that you weren't content with it, so you had to add
yeah,
more to it until you were
yeah,
content with the book?
yeah. I mean, if we're gonna be sarcastic about it, yeah, absolutely, yeah, yeah. I had to just work through it, and finishing a book is like it's hard to describe. I just knew I knew content wise what it needed to cover, but it's not just about the content. It's about how is this gonna. So I'll write the content, and then I'll go back and I'll add in quotes and whatever, and then I'll go back through it again, and I'll just read it as the reader. And if I'm not happy, pretty much all three phases of that process, I'll rework it because it's not only about for me writing is not just about, as one of my pastors said to me, Dave, don't just be about conveying information, giving them a lecture, but really focus on helping people. And that is always just stuck in the back of my mind as I'm writing, as I'm recording, podcasting, reading somebody. How is that piece of content? How is that going to help somebody? And if it's not gonna help somebody, then why are we doing it, right?
Yeah,
Because we're not doing it. I mean, we can talk to ourselves and we can have other people listen, but at the end of the day, what are they supposed to take away from it? That's what I'm saying. And so that's kind of like what I'm thinking about as I'm, working on podcast content is, yeah, there's the good doctrine. We have to be faithful to the Bible. Absolutely. We have to be faithful to point to Christ. But then how is that how then once you get through that stage, then you have to ask yourself, well, how is this going to help other people?
hmm,
And that usually will a lot of the time, I'll write out something or whatever, and I'm like, this is good, but then how can what does this mean? What is somebody supposed to do with this? And some of the time that just ends up getting deleted. That piece of content gets deleted because
yeah,
it's for me. It's not for the other person. And I'm not saying that can't be helpful to other people to see lessons and things that you're learning, but at the end of the day, if you can't answer the question substantively, how is somebody being going to be helped by it? So in this case with this book, and what it really wasn't until there was a story that I tell at the end of the book, um, but I'll tell it a different way. So we hadn't been to Idaho in at that time a couple of years, and so we were coming back, and um, when we were in Idaho on the way, I just had this thought, and I don't know how to explain it. It was just a thought. I don't want to say it was like a voice from the Lord or anything like that because that's not true. But I just had this overwhelming thought in the back of my mind that I needed to go to the tire store. I needed to check my tires, have somebody check my tires because I know nothing about tires. And I was like, nah, whatever, I just kind of let it go. Okay. I didn't do anything about it. Meanwhile, I'm driving and it had snowed and the roads were icy and I'm kind of spinning out. My back tire is definitely fishtailing, and that's not a good sign. So then we get all the way across Oregon. We go from the eastern Oregon to basically the middle of Oregon ish where we live. Actually, more than the middle. We live more on the western side of Oregon. So, and it's a large Oregon is a large state. Okay, so we drove over all of Oregon basically with very bald tires. And so we get there and about half almost home with about 45 minutes away from home. It's snowing, it's really icy. Well, um, we made it all the way there. That was like at that point we've been driving at least 10 hours, 8.5, 9 hours. And we're about an hour away. And Sarah's driving at this time, and we spun out. We actually did a 540. And actually I've driven past that spot when it's clear in the same spot. And I thought, no, we're gonna if we don't stop right here, we're gonna go all the way down this embankment. Well, there's actually a tree there. So actually what we would have done is at worst we would have hit a tree. spinning around, and we wouldn't have gone off the embankment. We just would have gone into a bunch of trees, which would have been much better than what I was thinking at the time, that we were going to head down into a valley and we were going to go down a cliff. You know those movies that you see?
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking at this point. I thought I'm going to die. But I had when we did it the first time, I had real peace. And then I said, Sarah, I put my hand on Sarah. I said, just turn around, and there's a turnaround up here, and we'll get out. Well, then, so we do that. We go around again and do the same thing again. And again, I this time I did a 360 driving. And by the way, both times we're facing a semi. So, and this is slick, icy, and these trucks, they just boom, they go all down it's the Willamette Valley on Highway 58 here, out in about an hour away from where I live, hour north of where I live. And they just go all throughout this whole area, up and down I-5 and through 58, all throughout the country. And so anyway, basically basically out of that, and we did ended up getting home safely. Although once we got onto I-5, it was even scarier. And we're just like, wow, I don't know if we're gonna be able to even get home. But so we get home, and then we get home, and my neighbor sees me out, and he's a former trucker. He says, I was looking at your tires yesterday, Dave, and you know that you can't drive anywhere with those, right? And he's like, you didn't drive on those from wherever you were coming from, right? And I said, yeah, I drove on those from Idaho. And he's like, you can't drive any further. You need to go before you go anywhere. Just go to get the tires. And so I go in and I tell Sarah, you need to come out here and hear what our neighbor has to say. And so she does, and she's like, I didn't have any idea at all. And I was like, well, I had this thought in the back of my head that I needed to go to the tire shop and get new tires. And I didn't get the tires. And so, but then, like, that next day we went and got 40 tires for that car.
Oh, I
Uh,
bet.
and it was crazy because when I write about that's more detail than I share in the book. But so there's a little inside information. But out of that story, I realized I was ready to finish this book. I realized that in the midst of going um 540, 360, almost going in my mind down this ditch, you know. Um so I realized that I have real in this circumstance that's really hard, I have real contentment. I'm actually ready now to finish this book. And I knew at that moment, I said to Sarah on our drive, I said, I finally have the ending to my book because I'm finally able to wrap up this book. I mean, I'm finally able to say, hey, here is something that somebody can take away. Here's a good ending to this book. Whereas before, I was just kind of like, hey, I don't really have an ending. It's just kind of hanging and I'm stuck. But I knew right then I have to put this is the ending to the book. And that just kind of wrapped up the book. And then there was editing and changing of some parts from like the beginning of the book to the ending of the book. And uh but that's kind of so if you're writing, if you're podcasting, this can be a lesson for you, thinking about, hey, I have all these ideas, I have this content. Think about that. Okay, you have good content ideas, great. Second, how's this going to minister to somebody? How are you going to take it, and then what are they going to take away? So that's just kind of like how as I'm writing a book and thinking through some things, what helps me, and hopefully that can maybe help somebody else as they're thinking through, and whether you're doing a Bible study or preaching, only men can preach. So there you go.
Amen to that one.
But oops, sorry, not sorry about that.
Yeah, don't be sorry about that one.
That was a joke. That was a joke.
Women need to be content with their role.
Right, right. Exactly, exactly.
Yep.
You're writing books or articles or whatever. So, hopefully that can be a help to your listeners. So,
Well, that's one thing that I really liked about this book is You made it applicable to people who um, of all different walks. I mean, you don't have to be a minister, you don't have to be a pastor, you don't have to have gone to seminary to be able to understand your writing. Your writing style was really well thought out because though you did use, biblical terminology, you did use some language that some people wouldn't understand necessarily. You did a good job at explaining exactly what each thing meant so that you don't have to feel like you have to be a scholar in order to read it and be able to glean from it. And I really liked that you intertwined the story of the Pilgrims Progress by John Bunyan with the life of a Christian and the idea of contentment, because it absolutely is applicable to that. And it's like you took it and you just drew out from that story um, something that is fundamentally true and probably part of why he wrote that. I mean, that it seems to me that that is like a foundational piece to the story that a lot of people probably don't necessarily sit in. So, what made you decide to use that classic as a foundation for telling your story?
I absolutely love this question, by the way. I haven't been asked this question. So this is part of the reason why, I kind of canceled this contract with this other publisher and went this different direction. And I wasn't sure. I was thinking really hard. This is one of the other reasons why I was stuck writing this book, because I always try to have some sort of like church history story that can really help the person not only learn about more about church history, but also connect with the real people that God has saved and God has used throughout history, which I think is really important because I don't think enough writers do that. But anyway, I was really stuck. I was like, what story do I use? Right. And so we're sitting here. We had watched, I think, the animated version of Pilgrim's Progress, and then it just kind of smacked me in my face. I was like, you need to use Pilgrim's Progress. And I thought, "Oh boy, here we go." And I had to think about that, and I had to talk to some friends. I'm like, am I you gotta be really, really careful with the classic piece of literature, especially something that is so well known as Pilgrim's Progress. And so I had to think long and really hard about it and just talked to some friends about it, and they said, "No, that's a great idea." Like you said, it makes perfect sense. It might even be why he wrote it. I don't know. I'm not a Bunyan scholar, so I can't say one way or another. But having read this story many, many times, it just kind of it connected with me because when he leaves, his home, he's scattered, right? He doesn't know where he's going. He gets distracted. Goes to the Valley of Despond, which is all about depression and discouragement, and he just sinks, and then he gets lifted up, and then of course we know that those bags, that backpack on his back represents, he's a slave, enslaved to sin, and then he gets that tossed off as he understands the righteousness of God in Christ, and then he, goes on, begins that process of sanctification and learning spiritual warfare, learning biblical interpretation on his way to the celestial city. So it just kind of connected with me as I'm writing this book. Hey, this is something that can really enhance this book. Now, I only use little snippets of Bunyan's story just to illustrate the point, of what, since it is Bunyan's story is an allegory, but it applies to our life in Christ. It's an allegory that has a meaning, and
Yeah,
its meaning is really important. And its meaning is actually it's not it it's hard to describe if it's a piece of fiction, or it is a piece of fiction, but it also has a literal meaning. It has a purpose, and it illustrates biblical truth. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. And so I took that story, snippets of that story, to show, hey, here's how he fought with idols. Here's how he fought with spiritual warfare. Here's how he faced temptation. Here's how, talk about friendship. So in a little like, I think it's 74 pages, I think it is, something like that, if I remember right. There's a lot of different topics that I hit on, that can address just the total aspect of our life in Christ, from when we're a new Christian to we're maturing or mature in Christ, and in the various seasons of our life. And so Bunyan's story really connected with me and made sense, like I was talking about a minute ago. How is this going to relate to the reader? Well, this perfectly relates to the reader. And then the more times that you can hit somebody with the same idea in a book or teaching or a podcast, the better. Um, so I wanted to do that. I wanted to introduce the idea, bring it up again, and then kind of push it home into their mind. And this is what, by the way, this is a very biblical idea, because Paul, like we talk about, like I talk about in the book, Paul does this in Philippians 4. And as I was really studying Philippians 4, what I began to see, I mean, these are imperatives, but what Paul does in that text is he begins in verse 2 talking about, we're in the Lord, we're in Christ. This is a language of we belong to him, he belongs to us, right? Union with Christ. But he also talks in verse 13 of that passage about, the sufficiency of Christ, which I know we've talked about and we'll talk about more a little bit later. But in interspersed within that context, verses 2 to 13, he's giving a list of imperatives. Now we might read those imperatives as, we have to do these are like, absolutely essential to our life. But what we miss is that context, that gospel context that provides the foundation, the fuel for how we're to obey those things, right? And so that's why Paul says we can rejoice in the Lord, and goes on and talks about practical peace. And so as I was this text was really being worked into me, it hit me. These things are not just like things that we're to do. These things are Paul is really pushing these things to the people that he loved dearly. He didn't have a complaint against the Philippians. He didn't write to correct them or anything. We know that he wrote this from prison, but he's writing to push this truth into people's lives. And it just hit me, like, how often in our writing, in our teaching, podcasting, etc., how often are we doing that? Are we just pumping out content? Because Paul is really concerned here at an application level that these people, the Philippians and us, are actually going to take this truth and drive it more and more. And so as I was really getting that, I was like, is that happening in my life? Woo! Um, and I think this was like 2 or 3 years ago. I preached a sermon when I was doing pulpit supply, and I actually did it all around the content of this book, an earlier version of this book. And I realized, okay, this is pretty good so far, and I can work on this, build this foundation. Um, that was really helpful to me, just to realize, hey, and I got such a good response, from a lot of people, and on the sermon, praise the Lord, all that. But what I realized is this really was an application project. So as I was writing it, I didn't realize how much I needed this. That's why I started out this way. I needed this more than anybody. We had moved from, uh, when I started this book, we had moved at the time, this is 2017, we had moved from Idaho to Southern California, for my wife got promoted to management with NASA. And that was a challenging time. Um, go moving away from being involved in, I was doing a fair bit of preaching. I was doing biblical counseling. I was doing this and that, a lot of men's ministry, even counseling guys, and then to go from that to being in the middle of the Mojave Desert. I think of it like Moses, really, in the Sinai, in his own wilderness. But um, that's kind of where I was, and then here I was writing this book on contentment during this time, and then we moved. We lived there 3 years, and then I moved. We moved, and so this book really was like 3.5 years writing. It shouldn't have taken me my first book. In all full disclosure, it took me about a month and a half to write. So for this book, which is smaller, to take more time doesn't make sense in an earthly way, right? Um,
No, but it makes perfect sense because that's kind of how God works with us in our ministries, because there's
right.
so often that we are compelled to talk about things and compelled to try and help minister to other people in certain ways that we ourselves are struggling with, and God's working on us in that department. And I know for myself, I talk about anxiety, I talk about depression, I talk about mental health. And a lot of the times it's after I have been struggling and God's been working on me. And I'm like, there's this, I don't know, I don't want to call it an epiphany, but, I have this new understanding, this newfound, um, okay, this is how I deal with this. This is how I lean on the Lord. This is what I'm supposed to be doing in order to um, live content in this world and not be depressed or be anxious or any of that. And that's when we go out and we start trying to help other people. So it makes perfect sense to me that you would be struggling at the same time as trying to write a book on contentment.
And even in talking about this, we've been doing a series on equipping you in grace for a while, on it, and just realizing there's even so many more ways that I could have talked about this from the Bible. There's so much more that I could have written on. And one of the things that's just been standing out as I've been thinking about this more is, as Paul says in Philippians 4:11, he learned this. Now we have to remember this before I say this next part. In Acts 9, when the Lord opens his eyes on the road to Damascus, right? He's told that he's going to suffer for the name, which he later will testify later on in Acts, and in other places in his epistles about how what he would have to suffer for the on account of the name, right? But what Paul learned, if you overlay Philippians 4:11 with 2 Corinthians 11 and 12, you see what he learned. But then he does something really interesting as he's talking, after he talks about what he learned and what he went through to learn that about contentment. He actually talks about in 2 Corinthians 12:10, he says, "For the sake of Christ, then I am content with weakness, insults, hardship, persecutions, and calamities. But when I'm weak, then I'm strong." This is in that context where he says, "My grace is sufficient for you." And of course, he's talking about this over and against the false apostles who boast in their superior knowledge and wisdom. Sounds kind of familiar today, right? The
Yep.
New Apostolic Reformation. But this is what Paul learned. He learned in the midst of his weakness. He learned what he talks about in Philippians 4:13. That's why we use that as like a t-shirt slogan today. I can do all things through my football score, my golf score, my what. It's like, no, wait, it can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And this is what Paul is talking about here in 2 Corinthians 12:10, in a different context, in a different way, using the same language about contentment, because contentment, as I talk about in the book, it's a disposition of the heart. We have content, we can be content because Jesus has led us through the door of salvation when we repent and believe, right? And then we can live out every day. We're to live out the daily reality of who we are in Christ. That's Philippians 4:6. through 8, that peace of God that passes understanding, because we belong to Him. We have that peace, and we are indwelt with the Spirit, right? So that's practical peace. We have positional peace, peace with God through Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. And we have this practical peace that's being made real in our lives through the work of the Spirit. And that's what Paul is saying, that he knew that peace positionally, he knew that peace practically, and he walked it out. That's where we have to talk about it in the church today, and what Paul is doing with the Philippians and with the Corinthians and in other places. He's very concerned not just that you know the right things, but that those things lead to a manner of life that honors God. That's why he can say to the Ephesians, "Walk in a manner worthy of the calling that you've received," or to the Philippians in Philippians 4:9. Practice these things, right? This is James 1:22. Don't be hearers only, but doers of the word. So God's concerned that we know the substance, but how is that truth being then walked out in our lives? And that's where that's where the rubber meets the road, when tough stuff happens. How are you doing it at taking those things and reminding yourselves? We see that in the Bible too. Israel was told to remember. They were to remember what God did. The story of the Exodus is a story of remembering, right? I mean, you could make that case. It was a story of remembering, and the story of the Exodus really typifies even the story of Christ, that coming deliverer who paid the penalty, in our place and for our sin, um, and was buried and rose again. I can't forget that part.
Yep.
So, and is even soon returning. He gives us so much help, and we have to remember. We have to take those truths that we know and remember. And that's what Paul is doing. He's helping the Corinthians, a church that, he even corrected them strongly, we know, in First Corinthians, but they had showed some remorse, in Second Corinthians, and he was still concerned about false apostles and those kind of things, and super apostles. We have that today, right? People who boast that there's apostles today, but where's the boasting in our weakness? Where's the honesty and the transparency? Where's the taking of the truth and even applying it to our hearts and our lives? Or you could say, where's the talk about sanctification? There's like zero talk about that. I
Yeah.
would I would even go so far as to say there's zero talk about what biblical salvation is in that movement. But
Well, I
um,
mean, if you're going to talk about that movement, you have to look at the fact that they're always seeking. They aren't content. That is a consistent hungering for more, demanding more. They want more experience, more emotion. It's a constant, I don't have enough. I want more of God. And it's like, okay, you have what you're gonna get of God. God gave you all of the things. You're not going to get more saved. you know, he's not going to be with you more than he already is. You have the Holy Spirit living inside you. You don't have to sit there and beat your chest and cry out for him for 4 hours. But what you were talking about a minute ago totally goes with the concept that you started the whole book with. And you started this book with the concept of already and not yet. And it wasn't even the first chapter, it was like the pre chapter. And you were talking about this, and I thought this was awesome. It's the concept that is greatly missed in the Christian circle today. And I'm going to actually read straight from the book, if you don't mind. People get a teaser.
do it,
Um,
do it.
so on page before before the first chapter, we'll just say that. Um, you said, through whatever life throws at us, God is faithful. The Holy Spirit brings conviction and comfort, and our local church is there to walk alongside of us. Learning contentment is a journey of a lifetime for every Christian. Contentment doesn't mean that we will have a life of ease, breezing through our daily walk until our last day. Contentment for the Christian means having peace amid the trials of life because of Jesus. So, like, we can be upset with what's happening in life, and we don't have to be happy. I don't have to be happy when I'm dealing with chronic illness, but I can be content in Christ because He is my strength. He is the one who sustains me. And how have you grown through this process? I think you've talked about this a bit, but how have you grown through the process of writing this book in the area of peace in the midst of the storm? And I know you were talking about the story of your drive, and that speaks volumes because it's hard to have peace in the midst of the storm. But how have you grown?
You know, I don't want to take too much away from the book, so I'll go a little bit different direction on your question, not to avoid the question, but to even talk about right now. In January 13th, my mom's second husband died of his a second massive heart attack, 100% blockage of the heart. And we're not going to disparage anybody that's dead. Um, but he was not a good man, and he was not a good husband at all. That's how that, and I'll just leave it at that. He didn't take care of my mom in the way that is proper for a Christian man to do. Her life in every facet is a disaster. And so, and when I learned um, that about his his passing, of course, but even before that, I was praying that the Lord be merciful. He ended up living for a couple of days, and so the Lord was merciful, and he was able to see his son and his daughter one last time, and even see my mom. And so my mom, his husband passed away, unfortunately, a few days after having that heart attack. And but through that, I was able to start to take care of her life. I knew that things were bad, and um, it's so tragic, um, how bad her situation is. But what I've been praying, um, as an application is, Lord, I know that you're working. You're at work in the midst of this situation. I'm here. I'm the Lord puts us where He has need of us. And we can always pray, Lord, use me in however you want me to do, right? But when we're put in that situation where we can actually be useful to the Lord, it's gonna challenge us. My for I'll start here and then I'll come back to this. In 2012, my dad was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia, and he was gone for about 6.5 years, and he came back, and he was actually lost in South Seattle. And I got this call, um, about a month after he had been at the hospital, from my older brother, and he we immediately rushed from Idaho to Seattle, which is a 10-hour drive with about an hour stop from where we were at in Idaho. And the Lord was able to use me to figure out all the ways in which where he had come from, where he was living, which I had tried to figure out on my own and couldn't. And uh, figured out where he was. We went all the way back to the source of where he was at, and how he got from there in Eastern Washington all the way to where he was lost, and unraveled a whole bunch of things. And the doctor was amazed. She's like, I don't even know how you managed to do that. It was like I just started asking questions like, where has he been? What is he doing? How did he get to that spot? Just really basic questions like an investigator would do. And we ended up figuring it out. Well, the same thing has been happening with my mom, since January 13th, and I can tell you that there's been, even a couple days before recording this, I had a really, just a absolutely abysmal day, dealing with this situation. And what these situations do is they frustrate even the most experienced, even the most educated, even the person that has all the skills in the world. You can have a laundry list of them, and I have initials after my name that I never use, and that's intentional. But let's just say I have those initials and I have that experience. And I was so frustrated. I took a long walk, and when I got back, I just ended up crying, um, because it's so sad. What the state of my mom, the state of my mom's life. She also has Alzheimer's, and it's hard when you see a family member. When you have two, but some people have one family member that have dementia. I've been dealing with this with my dad. Um, you don't even have enough time for me to tell you all the stories, but I've been dealing with my dad's dementia since 2012. I've been dealing with my mom's Alzheimer's since pre-COVID, and now I'm the durable power of attorney. I see her life. I took this walk on Friday, and I just reminded myself, do you remember, Dave, all the lessons that you've learned those first few years about how Christ is truly sufficient, how he's providentially working all things for the good of his name and for his own glory. You believe all those things, and yet even when I got back, I was from my walk, I was and even giving myself a good long talking to that whole like 30 minutes. I was still having a hard time believing it. And sometimes all that we can do is express lament. This is tragic. This is sad. And God knows, God sees, God hears. And Sarah reminded me when I got back, because I was crying when I was sitting on the couch. And Sarah's such a good wife. She'll say, "You believe these things, right?" Yep. Well, let's pray. And I said, I don't have the words to pray right now. Can you pray for me? And she sat there and prayed, and that's honestly that's some of the best ministry right there that we could ever have, um, to somebody. It's such a kindness. It's Galatians 6:2. It's bearing each other's burdens and loving our Savior, loving others. Um, and it's hard. The life that you talk about. We talked about the NER. We talked about the prosperity gospel. They would have no category for the kind of suffering that 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 I've experienced, that others have experienced, and I'm not, like, when I say that, I just want to be clear. Like, I'm not minimizing anybody's real experience of suffering. I'm very sensitive to that, because I've seen it up close and personal, for two and a half decades of ministry. Um, and it's hard, right? It hurts. It really does. And so, but at the same time, you asked about contentment, and so when I talk about Paul, Philippians 4:11, learning contentment in 2 Corinthians 11:12, I keep going back to this because it's not about what I'm going through right now. There's a God is orchestrating all of these things for the good of his name, and I'm smack in the middle of it. And yet I affirm God's unchanging nature and his nearness in the midst of those things. Those two realities are true because God is true, his promises are true, and so I believe them and I can walk through them. And now on my best days, I'm good, more than good. But on my bad days, man, I got to be reminded. And the reason that we have to be reminded is Hebrews 3:13, to be reminded that today is today, right? And so we
Yep.
remind each other. And so sometimes what I'm saying is emotionally, it's so raw, and it's a hard thing to believe, and that, yeah, I really do have contentment. I really do have true peace. I do really have true joy. It's hard to claim it ourselves. And that's why I'm saying we need to be reminded in the midst of these things. And as Jerry Bridges used to talk about, we have to preach the gospel to ourselves. We have to remind ourselves, as a Puritan said, and until we believe it, until, as Thomas Watson used to talk about, the fires of meditation. And we have to keep meditating on the word, and until we're reminded and stirred afresh by the truth that we know. And so that's what I'm talking about. It is a disposition of the heart. It's not something that I'm making up. It's Jeremiah Burroughs, the art and practice of contentment. It's John Flavel, The Mystery of Providence. I mean, and you can look at this. The thing is you can look at contentment through providence, through the stuff of our lives, through the trial. You can look at it from the angle of trials. You can look at it from the angle of suffering. But the more ways in which you look at contentment, it all leads you back to what you wrote, what you said, or what I wrote. It all leads us back to Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Jesus was the only one who was perfectly content, right? He was the only one who was perfectly sinless. He was the one who paid that penalty for us. And so that's why we can lean into his promises. And he invites us, even sums us to, he gives us the grace of God. He gives us the help of the Holy Spirit. He gives us the sufficient word. Um, and so just to wrap this up, this cover here, which my wife did, it really is the picture of Christian on the road, um, to this journey. That's what Christian was on. He was on it. He didn't know it at the time. You don't know it at the time. You don't know where you're at in that journey, but you're on this pilgrimage journey, to use Pilgrims Progress's language, and you are a pilgrim. You live in between the times that when Christ came, he came, um, he came under the sentence of death, Matthew 1:21, to pay for your sin, my sin. He came under the sentence of death. In that death, when he died, he said, "It is finished," in John 19:30, right? And we know that that started that at that time the temple was torn in two, that veil that separated us from God. So there's now peace with God through the Lord Jesus. 2 Corinthians 5, Ephesians 2, all many passages, right? And
Yeah.
so now we have a high priest who always lives to plead the merits of his own blood on our behalf, as Hebrews 2 and Hebrews 4 talks about so well. And we have Hebrews 7 talks about how we have an intercessor, um, and we have an advocate, John 2, 1 through 2. And there's so many passages, but the thing is all of those things, they all take us back to Jesus. They all take us back to the sufficient Christ, and to remind ourselves that in this life there's going to be trouble. Jesus said this. Paul said this. Paul experienced it. The issue is, are you going to believe the promises of God? Are you going to remind yourself of those promises? If you will, you're going to learn something through those things. And that something that you're going to have to say is going to help somebody else, that whether they have a memory illness, they have cancer, they have been abused, and those things really hurt, right?
Yeah.
But you're going to have something to say, and God's going to use that lived experience as you believe his word, as you take him at his word is true. You're going to have something to say, because you walked with his word, and you walked with your experience in your experience with the word, believing the word, and you walked it out, and you're going to have something to say that's going to be a priceless. It's priceless. Um, there, like I said, it's easy. It's easy to get up here and recite systematic theology and biblical theology. I can do that with the best of them. I can go into church history like nobody's business. My wife and I joke whenever she comes on the show. She jokes, but she's not really joking. That I could sit here for, on a drive, right, for hours, and then I look over at her and she's sleeping. That's actually the reality, okay? But the thing is so the content isn't hard. The issue isn't content though. The issue is, how am I taking that content and applying it to our lives? And even for the best of us, if we're honest, and got to be really, really honest, memory illness, Alzheimer's, dementia, cancer, they hurt. We know why they happen, because of the fall. We know that death and disease are here because of the fall, right? But we also know the great hope that one day that all death and disease and dementia and Alzheimer's and cancer and COVID and whatever else nasty thing that emanates from the pit of hell, right? And from the devices of evil men, whatever is going to come, it's all going to be gone
Yeah.
when Christ returns. And
Well,
that
and Jesus being our example, right? He's the one who we look to see how to be content. He still, in the garden, sweat blood. He was so anxious, he sweat blood. We see men who knew who Jesus was and did great miracles, and still, was it Elijah who, after being with the prophets of Baal and calling fire down from heaven. I mean, talk about, I know who God is, like talk about knowing the power of God right there. And then when Jezebel said that she was going to go after him, he freaked out and he was like, just kill me. I just want to die. I mean, to have contentment doesn't mean we can't feel in this world. It doesn't mean we can't have emotion. It doesn't mean we have to like act like everything is just fine. And that goes to the next question, is the last time you and I had a discussion, it was on the sufficiency of Christ, right? And in your book, you're talking about Philippians. You say, God is not minimizing your anxiety. He's trying to get you focused on his sufficiency amid life's struggles and successes. That's what prayer does. It takes our eyes off of ourselves and gets us focused on him. It shares the burden of our hearts along with our requests. The only requirement that Paul lists here is that prayers and supplications are to be made with thanksgiving. And I absolutely love that, because the whole sitting in our pain, we can sit in our pain, we can understand what's going on, and there can be horrible circumstances, but we should look to the Lord as our strength. We should be praying and asking him, making supplications to him, unburdening ourselves on him, because he's the only one that can actually take our burdens, right? So do you want to expound on that?
absolutely. I think here's how I'll do it. And there's two in Paul's day. There was two prominent schools of Greek philosophy, and they were both talked about the goal of contentment, but they had very different ways of getting there. The first of these was Stoicism. They believed that human beings had no real control over external circumstances. So you were just subject to the whims of life. Whatever happened, it happens, right? So the only place that they could have control was in their personal attitudes. We know that we can't control what happens to us, they said, but we can control how we feel. And so what Stoics did was they trained themselves to achieve an inner sense of peace that would leave them unbothered no matter what happened to them. Just kind of today you would see people say, whatever happens, happens, right? That was kind of the idea. But the Epicureans, they were more proactive in their search for contentment. So what they wanted was to find a balance between pleasure and pain. And yet, like you were talking about, today these people minimize pain and they maximize pleasure. They're hedonists, right? They live for their own pleasure and joy. And yet, even achieving a goal in this area, it can result in real frustration. We might never obtain the aimed for pleasure, or having obtained it, we might realize that it does not bring what we thought it would. Well, Paul was neither of these things. Epicureanism eventually leads to being pessimistic. We can't get or maintain the pleasure that we seek. And yet, the Apostle Paul's doctrine of resurrection and the renewal of all things, it doesn't allow for this kind of pessimism. We see this in Romans 8:18 through 25, that the creation will be free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. And yet, Paul also rejects this passive resignation of Stoicism. He wasn't a fatalist. He didn't, oh, whatever's going to happen, happens. He's pressing towards his goals, and he calls us to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. So what my point is that the apostle Paul, true contentment isn't complacency. And it was not just a condition on this side of glory that could admit no feelings or of discontentment and dissatisfaction. Paul, was open about his feelings. He considers the sins of the church and his own shortcomings. He doesn't rest on his laurels. He works to resolve them both personally and pastorally. We talked about this just a minute ago about Paul learning, contentment in Philippians, 4:11 and 12. The secret that he learned was he can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So, like we talked about previously, this is union with Christ. We belong to him, he belongs to us. And this is where that real peace, real thankfulness, where it really comes from. It comes from the reality of reminding ourselves this is who we really are. And this is what Paul is unfolding in that passage in Philippians 4. He talks earlier in verse 4 of Philippians 4 how the Lord is near. That's such an interesting thing, and it just really, as I was working on this book, it really hit me. The Lord is near. But why is that there in that context? What's the point? Well, I think it's to really highlight. It highlights the nearness of God in the midst of our situations, which Paul is concerned with. And we often just kind of would read that, right? We're like, oh, I like verse 6, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, as you mentioned. But we have to go back and we have to look at what's the foundation here. And the foundation, he talks in verse 2, he talks about our joy being because of we're in the Lord. And then he talks about how the Lord is at hand. So the Lord is near. And so in the midst of the circumstances of our life, the reason that we can have peace is because God has come near, not because of our circumstances. So we have to look to the Lord. So talking about some of the background that I did is I think a little bit important because we can miss, some of the influences on the people that were the original audience, and then we do the same thing. We just kind of shrug it off and say, "Oh well, this just happening. It just happens, right?" And it's just outside of everything. And but we have to remember the Lord is near. He's sufficient. He's trustworthy. His word is true. So we have to take ourselves by the hand and we have to remember. And this is where Israel failed, by the way. They failed to remember. They failed to remember the charge and the commission that the Lord gave them. And we forget that today, too. We have been given this great treasure, as Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians 4, this treasure in earthen vessels, right? This great commission, this good news to herald this the righteousness of God in Christ alone. And we forget that all around us are lost people who need the gospel. We can easily forget in our own personal suffering, in our own personal financial trouble, in our own personal health issues, or the issues of family people. And I'm not trying to meddle in if anybody's situation or minimize that in any way, but we all forget and we all have to remember. And this is why Paul is reminding the Philippians of what he learned, because we got to remember what we've learned, and then we have to remind ourselves. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what Paul is doing with the Philippians, a church that he dearly loved. And later on, by the way, in the same passage, he talks about how they revived their concern for him. It wasn't that they weren't still concerned for Paul and his ministry. Paul birthed that church. You know, it had to do with the fact that they were poor. They were really, really poor. And yet, even out of their poverty, they were still giving themselves for Christ, and then they were able to give to Him. They're one of the only churches that Paul publicly acknowledged that they gave, to his ministry of tent making, which is what he did, and to provide for himself so that he would be, no bother or anybody to anybody. So there's a lesson there, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that the Lord is near. There's joy in the Lord. There's the help of the Lord, um, in the midst of really hard things. We have peace, and y- that's why we have to go back to lament. Um, Lament just means that, as psalmists talk about, it's just pouring out. It's God giving you permission to pour out your hurt, pour out your struggles, pour out your doubt, pour out your questions. And I'm going to be honest with you. We and in the church today, we have done a really poor job of talking about lament. This is why you have so many people, like you were talking about, unburdening yourself. This is what lament allows you to do. God says, "Come to me and lament. Come to me and pour out your hurt, pour out your struggle." Yeah, yeah. Psalm 42 and 43. By the way, Dr. Martin Lloyd Jones was like the R.C. Sproul of his day. Okay. He was like the John MacArthur of his day. Dr. Martin Lloyd Jones wrote a book on spiritual depression, its causes and influences, because before he was a pastor, he was a medical doctor, and God called him to be a pastor. Now, that book, he talks about Psalm 42 and 43, which some people would argue is just one psalm. It's like whatever. But the point of it is discouragement. How do you deal with discouragement? And in the book, Lloyd Jones talks about how we need to remind ourselves. We need to remind ourselves of who God is and what God's done and all that He is, as revealed in the Word. And I love that, because that's, if we're going to be content, that's really where it's going to go back to, and it's going to go back to lament. It's going to go back to understanding the character of God and what God allows us to do. And a lot of people get really frustrated. It's okay. God knows. God knows we get frustrated this side of eternity. He knows. It's okay that you get frustrated. Jesus wept. The psalms poured out their frustration. And yet, if you look at a psalm like Psalm 42, what does it do? It reminds us, David reminds us, yet again, I will praise the Lord. It's okay to pour out your, but at the end of the day, are you going to, as you remind yourself, are you going to turn from being sorry and, all that, uh, to pouring out your praises to God? Because I think if you're going to pour out your heart to the Lord, the result is going to be either a heart that has even more confidence in God, or it has a lack of confidence in God. And if it's a lack of confidence in God, we know what that is. That's unbelief. A heart that has confidence in God will pour out its heart, believing that God will do what He says He will and meet us where He is. As Paul's talking about in Philippians 4, the Lord is near, right? So we
Yep.
trust the Lord is near in the midst of our situations. It's a theological idea. It's an incredible theological idea that we see throughout the whole Bible. And it's an anchor in that passage that we have to understand to really understand the rest of that passage. And so when we understand that truth, what we understand is that the Lord is faithful to His promises. He's going to be near to us. And in the midst of our trials, our suffering, our hurt, our pain, our doubt, our questions, we pour out our cares to the Lord because He truly cares for us. And we know that basic truth. How are we doing at applying it? That's 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 what Paul is after, is not just you knowing it, but applying it,
Yep.
in Philippians 4. And so that's another part of contentment that I don't think we talk about enough, is the one why I'm mentioning it is this is an application. I've been a Christian, um, since I was 5. I don't think I ever was taught, even going to good Bible believing churches, studying my Bible for as long as I have. I don't think I ever was taught this. And I'm not saying this is a novel idea. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I don't think that we think about it, contentment, as an application thing, and then as a journey this side of eternity. And that's what clicked in my mind, at least, so much with Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, is that he's taking a journey and he's viewing the Christian life as a journey. And that's all I'm trying to do is get you to see that wherever you're at with in your journey with Christ, it is a journey, and you need to grow in your contentment and in your practical peace. And how are you doing it walking that out in your suffering trials and your friendship and your marriage and every area of your life? It's just a question. It's a question that has been with me when I was writing this book. It's still a question that I'm still thinking about. I don't have all the answers. I wrote there's 70 there is I was right. There's
Yep,
72
you were right.
pages. There's 72 pages in this book. So, I'm still learning, and so are you. And so hopefully this book can help. So,
Amen. I mean, it is definitely going to be a lifelong journey because we're always changing and our circumstances are always changing. And the areas that we need to learn how to be content in are always changing. And I love that you were really pushing and sitting in the that we need to look to the Lord and that He is near. Philippians says He is near, and that's one thing. When I was reading it, years ago, I was really, really struggling with anxiety and depression. And one of the things that helped me the most was Philippians 4. And it was, to me, the understanding of God's character, and that I don't have to be happy in every circumstance, but I can look to Him to be my strength in every circumstance. And I look to Him, I pray, and I ask Him for the strength and the help because I know that He made me, that He loves me, that He sustains me, that He promises He will walk through this life with me. I understand that if He is near, that means that the maker of everything, the one who loves me more than anybody else, He is near to me. He says that I matter more than a bird, that He will clothe me, He will take care of anything that needs to happen. And that also means that I have to be content in what I don't have. And when I think that I need more, I have to understand I don't need more because God's not giving me more. And there's a reason. And so, like, a wonderful question is always, what is God doing through this when it comes to hard things, sickness, just poverty? There's so many different things that can make life harder. And the best question I have is, what is God doing through this? Because I can guarantee He's doing something. And there's going to be something good, even if you never see it. There's something good that He's doing through it. And I really appreciate having you on. I know I need to be be aware of your time, but if you haven't gotten the book, go get the book. It is Contentment, The Journey of a Lifetime by Dave Jenkins, and I will have a link to it in the description. So check the description. And I really appreciate having you on, Dave.
it's been a privilege to be with you, Leah. Thank you so much for the great questions and the conversation.
No problem. Thank you for coming on. I can't wait till next time.
Me too. It's good.
Until next time, you guys, be blessed. Thank you for listening to the Take Me to Eternity podcast. If you have questions or would like to contact me, you can email me at takemetoeternity@yahoo.com. You can find me on Facebook and YouTube under Take Me to Eternity. My podcast is on most podcasting platforms. You can also find my blog at www.takemetoeternity.com. Thank you for joining me today. It has been a pleasure. Until next time, know truth, love truth, share truth, because Jesus is truth. Be blessed.